everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining Planet Tracker on today's webinar, Will Fashion Die Another Day? A discussion around water risks in the wet processing space. Today we're planning on discussing some of the opportunities and challenges in getting wet processors to transition to more sustainable practices, and of course the financial risks if they don't. You'll notice a short survey poll has just kind of popped up on your screen. It'd be great if you can fill that in. Also, there'll be one towards the end. And please go ahead and submit any questions into Q&A as well, so we can get to those. Today, I'm delighted to be joined in this discussion by three fantastic panelists. First, I have Sharif Hock, who's currently the Water Programme Lead at H&M. Sharif has over a decade of experience as a sustainability professional in the apparel and textile sector, and has led various water-related projects globally, from wastewater treatment monitoring to water consumption reduction, rainwater harvesting and water recycling. I'm also joined by Rakesh Vazirani, who leads the Sustainability Services for TUV Rhineland's Products Business Unit. Within the textile and footwear supply chain, the team manages assurance programs to enable commitments made by brands, retailers, factories, concerning kind of sound management of chemicals and responsible production. And Rakesh's experience stems from being involved with supply chain traceability programs across the fresh produce, automotive and electronics sectors that really required capturing material footprint and sustainability performance. And then finally, I'm also joined by Phil Patterson, who set up Colour Connections Textile Consultancy in 2007 to provide advice, information and training on dyeing, printing, finishing, colour management, restricted substances management and sustainability to all parts of the textile supply chain, from industry through to retail. He has over 30 years of experience in the wet processing industry, including more than a decade at M&S as head of dyeing. And currently he serves as chairman of the ZDHC MRSL Advisory Council for Chemical Inputs and the ZDHC Wastewater Council, and has recently been appointed as chairman of the Microfiber Consortium, a multi-stakeholder group which aims to reduce the formation and discharge of textile microfibers into the environment. Before then, the discussion, Peter Elwin, who's the head of textiles and land use here at Planet Tracker, will give a short presentation on our recent report, Will Fashion Die Another Day? So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everybody. Great to have you on this webinar. Just before Christmas, we published a report on the wet process industry, looking at the water footprint of that part of the textiles production chain. It's freely available on our website, so if you haven't had a copy and you want to get one, just go along to Planet Tracker and download it from there. But I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking through the key findings that came out of our investigation that really lead on to the discussion that we're going to have today. For those who don't know Planet Tracker, a non-financial think tank aiming to align capital markets with planetary limits. And into our textiles program, we are looking particularly at the financial institutions that have publicly funded listed companies across the textiles, apparel and luxury goods sector. What we're aiming to do is to persuade investors to take a more holistic view from an economic perspective and really think about the natural capital base that underpins the textile industry and incorporate that more into their investment thinking and their allocation of capital, so that we all collectively move the textiles industry towards a more environmentally sustainable footing. Now, in terms of our investigation into wet processing, the obvious question is why wet processing? Why start there? Well, you'll see from this chart that wet processing is the area of the textile supply chain that has the heaviest environmental footprint in terms of water, in terms of climate impact, greenhouse gas emissions, and also in terms of health from the chemicals and the pollution. Couple of statistics you can see there on the slide. 20% of global industrial water pollution comes as a result of textiles broadly, and to produce 1 kilo of textiles on average, and the range is obviously pretty wide, but on average takes 430 litres of water. That is roughly 2.5 years of annual consumption for an adult. So an extremely heavy water footprint associated with textiles production. And it's the wet processing area, as the name suggests, that is primarily responsible for a lot of that. So that was why we wanted to dig into it. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to see if we could actually link the factories and where they were located for each of these wet processing companies with the companies themselves, and then track that back to the investors who were standing behind them. So we started with 740 publicly listed companies that we identified as directly involved in wet processing, either to a sort of a whole extent, or it was a majority of their business. Most of them, as you might guess, were based in emerging markets. And then we started to look to see which of those companies we could actually link to their factory locations. That was quite a lot more challenging, but we managed to identify 230 of those companies where we could actually identify the factories that they owned and where those factories were located. And using the WRI's Aqueduct database, which gives water risk scores for particular locations all around the world, we were able to allocate a water risk score to each factory and thereby to aggregate that up to the company and then ultimately to allocate that to the investors standing behind them. We identified 51 companies with an aggregate value of $29 billion that have their wet processing facilities situated in areas that the WRI scored as extremely high or high on their water risk scale. You can begin to get a sense of just how exposed these businesses are to water-related risk, water-related factors. The other interesting thing that came out of our survey was the fact that many of these companies are actually owned, majority owned by individuals or families. So there's a very strong sort of family entrepreneurial thread running through a lot of these businesses. A lot of them are relatively small. And you can see here from this chart that sort of by value and also by number, individuals are very, very involved in backing the companies that are working in the wet processing industry. And you can see that there on the side of the chart, 67% of individual investors are exposed to wet processing assets with extremely high or high water risk. So again, that thread coming through that a lot of individual sort of entrepreneurs are very exposed to water risk through where these companies are actually situated. And moving from that, the other thing that we investigated, and again, this is something that we want to do more work on, but it's the sort of thing you might have guessed, but I think this particular point is quite striking, that the brands that are ultimately responsible for driving the purchasing practices, designing the clothes, retailing them to investors, and creating that cycle of potentially fast fashion running through the textiles industry, they are, as you might expect, much more financially strong than the wet processing companies that sit within their supply chain. So you can see there the brand average EBIT margin just above 10%. If you take the really big brand companies, they have margins that average 13%, where the wet processing companies that we identified slightly below 8%. So much stronger margins, much more profitable operations at the bottom end, at the sort of the retail end of the textile supply chain. That's where most of the value is being captured, but obviously the environmental costs are happening much further up the supply chain. So the question, and it's one of the things that that may well come out in our discussion today, is to what extent the brands should take responsibility for the environmental harms that are sort of being caused by the textile industry as a whole, since they are the ones that are ultimately sort of driving the materials through the supply chain. The other interesting thing, just as a little side point, and this is a slightly superficial sort of example, but in just very crude terms, if you took 50 basis points off the margins of the big brands, that would actually sort of release $220 million US, which arguably could be allocated back across the supply chain. So not an enormous hit in terms of margins, but would potentially release quite a large sum of money to fund changes further back up the supply chain. Okay, I think that's probably enough on our report. As I say, it's available on the website, so do download it if you haven't already read it. We'd love to hear your comments, but what I'd like to do now is to hand back over to Catherine to continue this discussion with Sharif and Rakesh and Phil. So over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Peter. So I guess let's start with Sharif. So Sharif, so how do you at H&M approach and consider your own water-based risks and that of your suppliers?
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you again for welcoming me over here. I think when it comes to water risk, we as a group of companies of brand, we have been exposed to the risk that are not unique, I would say, but it's been shared risk, which means that we shared the same risk with our business partners. with our stakeholders, our engagement with the basin stakeholders as well. And what kind of risks that we have been looking at. To learn a bit more on those risks, we have actually used WWF Water Risk Filter, which is the other tool of, which is just mentioned by Peter of WRI, is that we have pinpointed our around 500 wet processing facilities, where they are, what are the scenarios of the water uses pattern in those basins, and how is the kind of the risk that we see. And overall, I would go on a bit high level, is that we see a couple of risks is very, very dominant, and which is, I believe, is not so new to all of us, is that first of all, we have operational risk, which has been connected to the pollution risk. Fashion industries has always been accounted for 20% of the wastewater pollutions overall. Then we also see the risk around water allocation. We have also seen that the water related costs have been rising. There were been kind of license to grow has been limited because of implementing the better efficiency and other things. On the other hand, we also have seen some of the regulatory challenges where we have seen that more stringent regulations are being coming into effect, which we welcome as long as those are being enforced, and our business partners are being kind of compliant to that, and we support that fully. But then we are also at the same time, we have found that the new regulations that are coming, it's been quite high, and that has to be implemented. There has to be a capacity building process has to be over there. And apart from all these risks, we also see that some of these risks are being appropriate or been connected to our facility, and then yet many of these risks that we just discussed now are being handled or being kind of engaged outside the facility.
Right, and then I guess, so how are you helping to support those wet processes in transitioning, I guess, as you're seeing these challenges coming up around regulation? So how are you helping them do this to kind of support that transition?
Wet processing, be it at tier 1 or tier 2 or even tier 3, it's extremely important for us when it comes to our water agenda, our water roadmap. And according to H&M water roadmap, we require all our business partners to act on 3 major areas. We called it water efficiency, water quality, and then water circularity. What encompasses water efficiency is when that we want our suppliers to reduce their water consumption per pieces compared to the baseline of 2017. We are supporting our business partner to go for more rainwater harvesting wherever it is feasible. We are actually having a target of having 50% of our business partner to adopt rainwater harvesting. In terms of water quality, we require that all wet processing facilities that are working for H&M Group, their wastewater treatment plant or effluent treatment plant has to be functional, and we do it assess on a yearly basis, and they need to secure certain qualifications or certain requirements before they're termed as functional. We also require all our business partners to meet the JDC requirement wastewater when it comes to wastewater quality discharge. And in terms of circularity, we had targeted that by 2020, we will have 15% of our wastewater being recycled back into the production. So apart from these 3 supplier or operations specific goal, we also have a goal on collective actions where we engage in different basins with WWF, with WRG. We have an ongoing partnership in Bangladesh with WRG 2030. We have a global partnership with WWF, and where we have been engaged in China, in Turkey, and where we are looking at the local context and how we better support our business partners. And when it comes to how we are supporting, is that we first of all, we focused on creating that awareness that why we need to act on water. And as I said, that the water footprinting or water efficiency is often not taken into considerations. The water efficiency KPI mostly is not been considered to be a business KPI yet, which we have changed in our supply, where they are being kind of measured what level of water efficiency they are, and they are being comparing with their apple-to-apple peer. We started to do the measure our water consumptions, incoming water, how much water has been used in production, how much water has been getting discharged out of the ETPs. So we have also started the basic area of measure, because if you can't measure, you can't improve. Capacity buildings is the next point that I would say that we work hugely with our business partners. We work with external collaborators like IFC, where we have engaged into Bangladesh to lead most of our wet processing units to go for cleaner production. We are also been partnered with Sweden Textile Water Initiative in 5 countries to lead cleaner production agenda into our supply chain. Having said that, the last but not least, the point that we are like to share is that we have been also encouraging and facilitating the green financing for our facilities in different countries, where we have been looking at what are the possibilities that that the banking organizations or the financial organizations can facilitate the business. And since our supply list has been quite public, so we welcome such engagement, which will facilitate green financing or support from the financing organizations to our business partners.
Great, thank you. We'll definitely come back to that financing aspect. And Rakesh, so how do you at TUV Rhineland engage with factories then in regards to water-based sustainability aspects, and what do you see as those challenges in evaluating water-based risks of factories?
Right, thank you for that. Thanks, Sharif, for a big picture overview of what you're doing as a brand. Thank you, Catherine and Peter, for giving us this opportunity to share, but also to learn from our peers and also the participants. And I must say before we start off that Will Fashion Die Another Day has been one of the most fascinating and interesting and entertaining reports in the recent years. Yeah, as an Indian, I want entertainment, and this has been one of the best one, so congratulations for that. I work with TUV Rhineland. We are a third party involved in audits, assessment, technical evaluations. So when we engage with factories, let's say, let's consider 3 examples. A factory who's just starting off on their journey with regards to water stewardship, water efficiency. So we work with them by training them on what is the best available technique, what are the measurement scenarios that they could employ locally. So for example, providing training on water stewardship standards. So somebody who's just starting up as a facility, trying to understand what to do. Then let's say somebody who's a little mature, where they would say, okay, I've done all my homework. I've set up some systems and processes. Let's go ahead and evaluate me. Evaluate me as per one of those standards out there. And let's see, how do I fare? Do I get a platinum level on AWS? Do I get a silver, gold? Let's see, how is my overall performance? And let's me identify the gaps that I have to fill in. And then let's say the ones who are ambitious, who are aiming for the North Star, who would say, I've done my homework, I've set up the minimum requirements, and now I need to get more water efficient equipment, more energy efficient equipment, better chemicals which end up using less water during production, and that requires money. Help me tell my story in terms of metrics. So those financial organizations who are there can utilize that data, can put it into perspective. What's the amount of water this factory uses per garment produced versus their peers? How does it compare to the overall water risk in that country? So that a finance organization or an insurance company invested into green insurance or green finance can look at that metrics and say, oh, you're at point A and you want to go to B in terms of efficiency, which requires a capital investment of X, which will help me reduce the risk in that country by Y percentage. Boom, let me go ahead and invest. So those are the 3 engagement areas. The 3 involved in terms of challenges. I mean, we heard from Sharif the multitude of stakeholders. Yeah, he mentioned as a brand what they expect. He also mentioned that they have an arm which is providing finance to those factories via IFC Pact. All of them are looking at different numbers, different metrics, different risks. And so it's making sure that just like for somebody who's into finance, the terminology we use in terms of zero liquid discharge or water usage per garment is new, it's foreign to them. In the same way, many of those metrics that finance organizations are looking at are also new for the factories. So somehow having this translation, yeah, from what the financiers need into business, everyday business for the factories, and the other way around, yeah. What is it that the factories are looking at in terms of resource efficiency and translating it into the risk factor for the investors?
Great, thank you. And I guess then Phil, Rakesh and Sharif talked a little bit about how they see water-based risks, but we at Planet Tracker, we think about water as part of natural capital. So do you believe brands are properly accounting for water? And what are the key actions and solutions you think brands and wet processors can implement now to account for it properly?
Absolutely. I think, this is important to take into kind of consideration that that water is not, it's a commodity. As of now, it's a kind of we need to consider its value that it's been conveyed in our operations, and we also seen the connections. Using more water means you have been ending up with using more energies and more chemical, which has been kind of inefficient to you. If we have been kind of protecting the today's water, it's kind of we are protecting our future water needs. So that's how we have been connecting to that into our work or kind of the water agenda. But also the important aspects would be that not only that accounting. I think the important part is that how we are improving on a kind of progressively. As I said, that our target initially was to compare with the 2017 to look at how much more efficient we can be. Of course, this COVID shutdown, factory closure has had a big effect on those efficiency. But we have also seen that if we take out those kind of force majeure out of the equation, we have seen that there is quite a lot of potentials in terms of efficiency. But we are quite aware that only efficiency will not solve the problem, because that's a part of the problem and that will ease the problem. But then we need to look at the bigger possibilities where probably we will need to have more innovations or kind of zero water users in cotton dyeing. So innovations need to came into effect with a lot more synergies that we see today.
Great, and then I guess turning to Phil, that's a great segue into kind of your experience on efficiencies. And do you believe brands are properly kind of accounting and becoming efficient, and what are the key actions and solutions you think they can take in order to get there?
Well, I think what people tuning into this webinar should really understand is that H&M are not typical. H&M have been doing a lot of work on water for a long time, and there are a couple of other brands that do really great work on water, but most brands don't. Many brands don't even know where their suppliers are, their wet processors. So they don't, you asked a question about are they accounting for water? They don't know where it's used. They don't know where their things are made. So everything is, in my opinion, has got to be underpinned by transparency. If you don't know where your dyers and printers and laundries are, you don't care. So don't try and pretend otherwise. But then you've also got people with good transparency who are playing catch up. Now, for me, there are two main business models out there. There is buy, then check, or there is check, then buy. And nearly everybody uses the buy, then check. So you place an order, and then you send your teams out to see if the factory's okay. And then if you carry on using them, you send your teams in there to make them more efficient. Now, to me, the sensible way of working is to check, then buy, set some business standards, and then send people out and say, is it okay to work with these people? And if it is, we will. If it's not, we won't. because we have this strange situation where we've got people like Rakesh and Sharif, who are great experts and are working with mills to help them improve. And actually, it should be the mills that are trying to improve themselves. And there is a lot of knowledge there, and there's a bit of a game being played. They play dumb and pretend not to know what's happening when they do. And in terms of the how efficient is the industry overall, you've seen the figures: 430 litres per kilogram compared to sort of world class of 50. It's awful. It's really sloppy. So the good news is there is a lot of easy wins, a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of getting improvements, and that is about attitude. It's about just using existing technology well. We don't need fancy new technology to reduce the water footprint by 50%. We just need people that care. And if we had a check then buy model with parameters in there, we could probably improve it by more than 50%.
And that kind of works really well, because I think we've talked a little bit about responsibility, and Peter kind of mentioned it in terms of whose responsibility is it, right? Like, is it the brands? But I mean, I guess from your point of view, Phil, and with your experience, you have a lot of experience in chemicals as well. How do brands best incentivize wet processors? And what do you think's worked best? Is it kind of this carrot or stick approach?
Yeah, I like sticks. In the world of carrots and sticks work a lot better. And actually, what you should have is a minimum expectancy for transparency, and then you should have some minimum standards. And I think we're at a stage now where we've seen the issues with water scarcity, with climate change. There should be some minimum standards for water consumption, for energy consumption. And if people don't meet it, you either don't buy from them if you're using the check then buy, or you either remove them from your supply chain, or you put them on notice. And it needs a little bit of firmness, but that's probably expecting too much too soon. So what you can also do, and some brands that are doing this already, is you can incentivize excellent water and energy consumption, and actually promote it in stores and say, here's a product that's been made in a factory that's really efficient. And I'd emphasize that factory bit, because it's no good having one machine producing fantastically low water, low energy products in a terrible factory that's polluting and is really inefficient. So it's got to be holistic. You've got to look at the whole system. So you can have both carrots and sticks working, but believe me, promoting the best is nowhere near as good for the planet as avoiding the worst. No comparison at all.
Fascinating. And Rakesh, would you agree with that in terms of the carrot versus stick approach? Is that what you see? What's your experience?
Well, when we started engaging in the beginning, it was more like a stick approach. Yeah, we were evaluating whether it was audits or testing, and we were finding, okay, too many harmful chemicals in the wastewater, bad. Or you don't meet the minimum requirements of water stewardship, sorry, you get no certification, bad. Okay, but there's a interesting power with the carrot approach, but it also has to go with our messaging. Yeah, my daughter told me based on discussions that she heard, there are no bad students, only bad teachers. And that has an immense impact. Yeah, perhaps the way in which we persuade the factories. I think at the end, everybody wants to do the right thing. Yeah, perhaps it's they don't know enough what will be the outcome of their impact today to the water pollution, that maybe some factories are not doing the right thing. So we use this different approach, which was kind of spearheaded by the programs of the German government, these public-private partnership programs, where during the training, the messaging was not do this for compliance. The messaging was, hey, listen, you are using resources, chemicals, water, energy. Do you want to use less water? Because if you use less water, you have to treat less water. Treating water is energy, saving energy, which is 30% of your cost. Do you want to save money by not wasting chemicals? Because better chemicals mean they can fix to the garment with lower energy or lower heat temperature and less water. And do you want to save money? Yes, yes. So let's talk resource efficiency, yeah? Because it will help you save money and save your bottom line. We have never met a single factory who says, I don't want to save money. I don't want to improve my bottom line. Yeah, there you go. Compliance is a useful byproduct of that. So I guess the messaging can help, together with, of course, the carrot approach of a brand saying, I will buy more from the one who's performing better, sure. And the stick approach saying, that's the negative list of factory, sure. But at the end, we have to persuade these people, yeah? We're not there to scare them away. Because at the end, we are gone. We are gone after 2 days, 4 days, 5 days. They are the one who have to be motivated to go ahead.
I mean, and ultimately, it does come down to money for these wet processors, right? Margins are quite small. So is there money on the table? Is that what you're saying? That these are easy wins with easy...
Absolutely. It has worked for us with these programs of GIZ, of the German government, whether it be in Bangladesh or now what we see in Vietnam. It's working wonders, yeah. And at the end, we are not seen as enemies there. So they are open because they know there's benefit for them while listening and working on these programs. Yeah.
I mean, could you give a percentage in terms of margins of how much might be on the table, or is that?
Oh, sure. I mean, we talk only water efficiency with investments of less than 200,000 and an ROI of 3 years. We're talking of improvement of between 12 and 18%. Yeah, it's a lot of money. Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you also mentioned a little bit about this holistic approach, you know, the idea that we can't just see water separate to energy, separate to chemicals, they all kind of work together. So perhaps you can kind of talk a little bit about that as well, of how you kind of approach the whole.
Sure. So let's look at the part of risks, yeah. And in order to bring up analogy, let's consider the situation. I mean, Phil. I see Phil is the only one who's wearing spectacles here. So once we are going to get our eyes tested at the optometrist, we're sitting down. They put up these glasses on us, and they tell us to read something. So maybe we start off seeing everything is blurry, and you're like, oh my God, this is really bad. And then they would put in another lens, yeah. And it gets slightly better, and another lens, and it gets slightly better, and another lens until it's perfect. You can see clearly, or maybe you can see nothing still. So it's somehow like that. Yeah, you look at the overall risk and say, oh my God, I'm using too much water. What can I save there? And then you add the lens of the chemical portion. Can I use better chemicals which can fix to my garments at lower temperatures and are also require less dilution in the water? Oh yeah, there we go. And then can I use a system which is a better energy efficient boiler? So even if I cannot compensate with the chemical water, then I can at least compensate with the energy part. And that's where we end up with the sweet spot, yeah, where the factory can see, well, okay, all of those things together, these are the variables. This is what I changed. Here's my increased cost in better chemicals, but I have the increased benefit of reduced energy during production and reduce energy in actual wastewater treatment, so that they are able to mix this together. Yeah. So the concept which is being employed now by, I don't know, maybe like 50 factories in the world today is this material flow cost accounting. What are the input materials? Raw materials, chemical stuff, price for that, energy, water, and so on. At every process step, what is being utilized, what's the waste, and finally also at wastewater treatment, what is the energy used there, so they can see everywhere and it's glaring. Because otherwise it's like you speak to the procurement manager to purchase the cheapest chemicals, which give the function. You speak to the production manager to give you the best output in the shortest time period. And you speak to the effluent treatment manager to get rid of harmful chemicals. Yeah, but with material flow cost accounting, they can see everything. It's just like we take care of money, yeah, in accounting, looking at materials.
And then the same kind of point to Sharif, you know, you are part of the water at H&M, but how do you work with your counterparts, I guess, in energy and chemicals? I assume you have them. And I guess, how do you measure, you know, these changes in terms of these various inputs?
At H&M, environmental aspects like energy, climate, chemicals, these are all kind of combined in a box. So it's not, we don't speak one agenda at a time. We actually talk all these kind of actions at one points of time. So that if energy efficiency are being connected with water efficiency, the water discharge quality has been connected with the chemical wastewater quality discharge, MRSL testings, We are also been connecting how we have been handling the waste. So it's all been connected in that way. But I really like to go back a bit when we talked about this kind of a carrot and stick approach, and then also we talked about what is the best way to do that, or is there any other way? I think the way or kind of the way we do at H&M is these partnerships. I like to say it's more of a partnership, and the average kind of span of our business partners is quite high. So I think that initial handholding, then initial convincing, initial motivation, that level of actions has been over for us in most of the cases. For example, even in 2021, if we need to talk about what is the importance of being water efficient or being secure the water quality, I think that's not enough. And I agree to that point with Phil. It's not enough. So how we have changed that? We have introduced a sustainability index on environment. There is a separate index for social agendas. But on the environmental agendas, we have been looking at how the facility has been performing on FEM, Facility Environmental Module, which has been introduced by SSE. All our Tier 1, Tier 2, irrespective of they have wet process or not, even they have wet process, they need to comply with these things. All our wet processing units, they need to be part of the GDC program. So from there, we also get to know that how about their performance in MRSL, how they are performing in wastewater quality. In terms of FEM, we get to know how is their management systems. We also collect quite a lot of data on energy consumptions and the water consumption, which eventually formulate the water efficiency and the energy efficiency things. We built all these KPIs into one index, which gives us how good is this supplier. So you don't need to claim that I'm good. Your score will say that yes, you are good, because the FEM has been verified by third party, and all the programs in terms of water, chemical, energy, and waste, these have been kind of calculated to a percentage and been added into the sustainability index. And it's pretty straightforward for us when we say that the better sustainability index you have, the better business we will get. That's even a KPI for sustainability work and also our business leaders. And that is, I think, the way forward where we feel that the better supplier, the improved suppliers, and the suppliers who will take the next step will have much more collaborations in terms of brands. And we do also see that they are our business partners who share the same vision on water, and we would like to grow with them.
Is that an internal metric though, Sharif? Is that just something available to H&M?
Supplier are absolutely, our business partner is absolutely aware of how we even calculate that part. They also get that scorecard that, okay, this is this season's score, and this score came from water efficiency, this percentage, energy efficiency, this percentage, and this is all open to our business partner.
Okay, and I guess to Phil, because Phil you have a lot of experience in chemicals management in particular, don't you, Phil? And I guess, we talk a little bit about measuring and reporting. What do you see perhaps as some of the issues with the current systems around measuring and reporting, and how could they be improved?
I think anything that's self-reported has got to be questioned. You can see I'm an old man. I've been in hundreds of factories, and I've never been in a factory ever where they've said we use 100 litres per kg, and I go in and say, look, you're wrong. You're only using 80. It's always the other way, always. And so in terms of anything that is self-reported, it's generally a work of fiction. So everything has got to be verified. And if it's verified, it's got to be verified by an expert assessor. Now in terms of finding out the energy flows and the water flows around the factory with various things being recirculated all the time, it requires an expert. It doesn't require somebody with a clipboard who believes what they're told. So verification isn't a visit to listen to what the self-certified information is. It's a genuine audit. So that is key. You need to have that expert audit. You also need to have measures in place, and things like water meters. Water meters should be mandatory. A brand should not be placed in business with a factory that doesn't have water meters. It's such a precious resource. It's so important in the developing world that should be a bare minimum. So if you get figures that aren't from metered, water meters or from energy systems or whatever, be very, very concerned about that. You mentioned chemicals, and there's been a lot of focus on chemicals over the last few years, and I think the industry's done a great job on things like chemicals at point of sale. We can't be complacent, there's still issues, but generally things are safer than they ever have been on the high street in terms of chemicals on product. So there's still some areas of concern, but it's better. In terms of chemicals in effluent, Greenpeace simultaneously did a great job and a poor job with the detox campaign, because they highlighted dihouse effluent, which wasn't on the agenda for many people. And it was music to my ears, because I've been going on about it for a long time before they did the initiative. But it diverted a lot of focus towards tiny amounts of obscure chemicals. And actually, it meant that we weren't focusing on water, we weren't focusing on energy. We weren't focusing on other issues of pollution, safe chemicals that cause more harm than harmful chemicals in effluent. So things like salt, starch, things like that, they're a much bigger problem than traces of obscure chemicals. I'm not being, it's good to manage the obscure chemicals. We should be doing that. But I think the one thing that has done is taken focus away from energy and water, and it's taken the better brands to grab that initiative and move it forward. So I'm pleased we're seeing it, but it's well overdue.
Interesting. And I guess we have one question that's just come in, and it is kind of, I wanted to segue into talking about it a little bit in terms of investment. So perhaps Rakesh, do you recommend possible ways of accessing financial resources or incentives? We talked a little bit before this about some of the issues that wet processors have in terms of financing. Perhaps you can talk about what you've seen.
Sure. So one aspect is dedicated programs, which are, let's say, the IFC program, World Bank funding, and many brands like Levi's, H&M, they get together. And then in countries like in Pakistan and Bangladesh and others, they have this IFC Pact program, where factories can commit to improvements and they get preferential financing. Yeah, but we are talking of the bigger scale, because not everybody works for Levi's and H&M, and not everybody wants to get €1 million or €500,000. Yeah, so this is linked to the UNEP finance initiative and now the insurance initiative. What's fascinating about it is that on a high level, a reinsurer like Swiss Re says, well, I'm going to pool in money into green insurance. Yeah, so if you're doing something good for the environment with a positive ESG aspect, I would look at your risk to be lowered, and hence I will have a lower insurance premium. But Swiss Re is a reinsurer, yeah? So their clients are insurance organizations and banks and so on. And the large banks say the same. Well, I have X amount of dollars earmarked for green finance. But now you start talking, everybody is short on time, short on resources. And people start saying, okay, so how do I focus on investment options? So if it's less than €2 million, please, I don't have time to look at it. And when it's less than €2 million, what are the numbers? What should I be looking at as an investor? Yeah. So as an investor, they typically want to know what is the local risk in the region where your factory is, not the entire country, because as you can imagine, we have same parents and siblings. Each one of us have the same hereditary traits, but we end up doing different things. Yeah. So in the same way, every factory in a very risky country can and will be different in terms of their risks. And that's where the factory has to indicate where they are located in that country. What are the local mandatory laws? If you're in south of India, there is requirement for zero liquid discharge. You cannot discharge water. Topic closed. So water pollution, low risk. Sludge and other topics you still have to talk about. Yeah. So that's how the factory has to indicate via their assessment. Here are the policies and regulations in the country and the region where I'm operating. Here are the metrics. Industry average, how many liters of water, where am I, and where do I want to go? What do I want to invest to go there? And when this happens, thanks to all the carrots where the brands are saying better score, better business, So here's my potential of increased business, better impact, and so on. There are, of course, the big reporting tools, industry-specific reporting tools. We heard this from Phil and from Sharif. We heard the SAC HIG FEM, which is specifically for the industry reporting on performance, water, energy, chemical, waste. But then the investors, they also talk about the SASB standard or the GRI standard. And there are lightweight reporting standards, for example, the sustainability code, which will make it easier for banks to move ahead. So 2 years back, there was a pilot project with Bank of Huzhou where they said, okay, I'm going to open up for preferential interest rates for loans if the factory can make a business case about sustainable investment, that it will have a positive impact on water and energy. And so the discussion started, so what should the factory provide to you? What kind of documents? Business plan, metrics, mentioning about which standards. And that's when these investors started realizing, yeah, the one who's sanctioning the loan was looking at the industry risk, was looking at the business plan and sanctioning the loan in the past with credit rating and so on. And now they have to know contextual risks for the industry in the region and how the measures will help mitigate or address the risk. Yeah? So it's also, I mean, we have to feel for all of these people on the green finance and investment side. It's a lot for them, for these peers to learn, to digest, to see which acronym to look for, which is relevant, and what numbers to look for, which is relevant. So recommendation would be to start off using industry metrics. We heard about the SAC HIG FEM, and to couple it with lightweight GRI reporting like the sustainability code, because this is something that every investor into green finance or green insurance is familiar with. Yeah.
Thanks. We've actually run out of time, unfortunately. I think we could go on talking for about 20 more minutes. But before we finished, I just wanted to flag that actually at Planet Tracker, our next report in the textile space is looking at some of the disclosure of the 230 publicly traded wet processors that we identified in our last report. And just to give you some idea of some of the numbers we're seeing, it's not great. You know, around 40% of those 230 companies give no disclosure, qualitative or quantitative, around water or chemicals use. It's a little bit less for, it's only about 20% give nothing for energy, but those are some of the numbers we're already seeing just from doing this big, you know, huge sample. So I think that's kind of interesting because it just shows that clearly people aren't communicating, and we do need to see more kind of measuring and reporting going on. But thank you so much to Phil, Sharif and Rakesh. Your insights have been incredibly fascinating. The poll has just popped up, so if people could fill that out as well. And I'm sure if anyone has any further questions, we've had a couple popping up, so I'll make sure to pass them on to the relevant people and get some answers for those as well. But thank you so much, everyone.